The piercing cries echoed across Willowbrook Community Park, like a siren call of injustice, cutting through the peaceful afternoon air with the raw desperation of a child's anguish. 9-year-old Bella Martinez clutched the swing chains with white knuckles, her small body trembling as a woman twice her size screamed inches from her face, spittle flying with each venomous word. "Get off! Get off right now!" Karen Whitfield's voice rose to a shriek that made nearby birds scatter from their perches. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into Bella's wrist as she yanked the girl from the swing with shocking violence. "You're too heavy for this equipment. You're going to break everything." Bella's sneakers scraped against the rubber mulch as she was dragged backward. Her afternoon sanctuary transformed into a battlefield in mere seconds. The swing set, a simple A-frame structure that had weathered countless storms and supported hundreds of children over the years, stood as silent witness to this moment of cruelty. Just 30 minutes earlier, Bella had walked the familiar path from her house on Maple Street to the park, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders with each step. The weight of the school day had pressed down on her like a heavy blanket, filled with whispered comments about her size, sideways glances during gym class, and the lonely lunch period when she ate by herself in the corner of the cafeteria. But the swing set had always been her refuge, her therapy, her place of peace. Dr. Sarah Chen, Bella's pediatric therapist, had recommended the swinging motion as part of her treatment plan. The rhythmic movement helped regulate Bella's anxiety, provided sensory input for her processing issues, and served as a form of physical therapy for her joint mobility. What others saw as simple playground equipment, Bella experienced as medicine. The proprioceptive input from swinging can be incredibly beneficial. Dr. Chen had explained to Bella's parents during their last consultation. It helps with body awareness, emotional regulation, and can significantly reduce anxiety symptoms. For Bella, it's not just play, it's therapeutic intervention. But Karen Whitfield knew none of this, as she stood in her self-appointed role as neighborhood enforcer, her HOA badge gleaming on her chest like a shield of righteousness. She had been walking her designer poodle, Precious, when she spotted Bella on the swings, and something about the sight had triggered her immediate fury. "Look at those chains," Karen had muttered to herself, her eyes narrowing as she watched Bella's gentle swaying motion. "They're going to snap. Then what, lawsuit city? Not on my watch." The confrontation had escalated within seconds. Karen had marched across the park, her heels clicking against the concrete pathway with military precision, Precious trotting beside her with a jeweled collar that probably cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. "Excuse me, young lady," Karen had begun, her voice dripping with false politeness. "I need you to get off that swing immediately. You're exceeding the weight limit." Bella had looked up with confused eyes, her dark curls framing a face that still held traces of childhood innocence, despite the pain that seemed to follow her everywhere. "But I'm not done yet," she had whispered, her voice barely audible above the creaking of the swing chains. "I don't care if you're done or not," Karen had snapped, her mask of civility slipping away like cheap paint in the rain. "You're damaging community property. These swings have weight limits for a reason, and you're clearly over them." The words had hit Bella like physical blows, each one designed to shame and humiliate. She had heard variations of these comments before, but never from an adult, never delivered with such calculated cruelty. Her therapy sessions with Dr. Chen had prepared her for peer bullying, but this was something else entirely. "I'm not that heavy," Bella had protested, her voice shaking with emotion. "My mom says I'm perfect, just the way I am." Karen's laugh had been harsh and bitter, cutting through the afternoon air like broken glass. "Your mother is lying to you. Sweetie, look at you. Look at what you're doing to these chains. They're bending under your weight. This equipment is for normal-sized children. Not, not what? Bella had challenged, surprising herself with her momentary courage. Not children who don't know when to stop eating. Karen had replied with vicious satisfaction, watching as the words landed like arrows in Bella's heart. That's when Bella had gripped the chains tighter, her knuckles white with determination. I'm not getting off. This is a public park. My dad pays taxes too. Karen's face had darkened with rage at the defiance. Oh, you want to be difficult? Fine. Let me show you what happens to difficult children who don't follow the rules. The physical assault had happened so quickly that Bella barely had time to process it. One moment, she was sitting on the swing. The next, she was being dragged backward by the wrist. Her body twisted at an unnatural angle as Karen's grip tightened like a vice. Stop! You're hurting me, Bella had cried out, her voice breaking with pain and fear. Good! Karen had hissed, finally releasing her grip and sending Bella tumbling to the ground. Maybe next time you'll think twice before ignoring a direct order from an HOA representative. Bella had landed hard on her side, her hip taking the brunt of the impact against the packed earth beneath the swing set. The pain had been immediate and sharp, but it was nothing compared to the emotional devastation that followed. Now stay down, Karen had commanded, pulling a bike chain from her oversized handbag with practiced efficiency. And don't even think about getting back on. The sight of Karen wrapping the chain around the swing's support beam had been surreal, like watching a fever dream unfold in real time. The metal links clinked together with finality, as Karen secured them with a padlock she had apparently carried for just such occasions. There, Karen had said with satisfaction, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Problem solved. No more damage to community property. Bella had pushed herself up to a sitting position, dirt streaking her school clothes, tears streaming down her cheeks. You can't do this. This isn't fair. Life isn't fair, little girl, Karen had replied, her voice cold and emotionless. The sooner you learn that, the better off you'll be. Now, let me give you some free advice. Go home. Put down the cookies, and maybe consider some exercise. There are plenty of activities that don't require equipment that might break under your weight. The cruelty of the words had been matched only by the deliberate precision with which they were delivered. Karen had clearly done this before, had perfected the art of psychological warfare against children who couldn't fight back. And another thing, Karen had continued, her voice rising as she warmed to her subject. If I see you on any other playground equipment in this community, I'll be having a very serious conversation with your parents. Do you understand me? Bella had nodded through her tears, too shocked and frightened to respond with words. The power dynamic was so clearly established, the threat so obviously real, that resistance seemed impossible. Good, Karen had said, smoothing down her blouse with practiced efficiency. I'm glad we understand each other. Precious. Come along. We have a community to protect. As Karen had begun to walk away, her heels clicking against the pavement with renewed purpose, Bella had found her voice one final time. My dad's going to hear about this, she had called out, her words carrying more hope than conviction. Karen had paused mid-step, turning back with a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. Your dad. Oh, sweetheart. I'm sure your dad has better things to do than listen to the complaints of a spoiled little girl who can't follow simple rules. But please, by all means, go ahead and tell him. I'd be happy to explain to him why his daughter was banned from the playground. The word banned had hung in the air like a physical presence, heavy with the weight of exclusion and discrimination. Bella had felt something break inside her chest, a small piece of her childhood faith in fairness and justice. In fact, Karen had continued, her voice gaining momentum as she sensed Bella's growing despair. Maybe I should call him right now. Save you the trouble of having to explain why you were being so disrespectful to an adult who was just trying to help you." Karen had pulled out her phone with theatrical flair, scrolling through her contacts with deliberate slowness. "What's his name? Martinez, right? I'm sure I can find his number. This is a small community. After all, everyone knows everyone." The threat had been clear and immediate. Karen wasn't just attacking Bella anymore. She was preparing to involve her parents, to spread her poison into the very heart of the family unit. The prospect of her father hearing Karen's twisted version of events had filled Bella with a new kind of terror. "Don't call him," Bella had pleaded, her voice breaking with desperation. "Please, I'll stay away from the swings. I promise." Karen's smile had widened at the capitulation. "That's more like it. See how easy it is when you're reasonable now. Run along home and remember what we talked about. And Bella, next time you see me in this park, you'll say hello and thank me for teaching you such an important lesson." The psychological manipulation had been complete and devastating. Karen had not only physically assaulted a child and destroyed her access to therapeutic equipment, but she had also demanded gratitude for the abuse. It was a masterclass in the exercise of power over the powerless. Bella had struggled to her feet, her hip throbbing with each movement, her spirit crushed beneath the weight of humiliation and fear. The walk home had felt like a funeral march, each step taking her further from the place that had been her sanctuary and closer to the difficult conversation she would have to have with her parents. But as Bella had reached the edge of the park, something extraordinary had happened. A familiar black sedan had pulled into the parking lot, its engine purring with expensive precision. The door had opened, and out had stepped a man whose presence seemed to change the very atmosphere of the park. David Martinez stood 6 feet tall, with the kind of bearing that spoke of confidence earned through years of courtroom victories and social justice battles. His tailored suit was impeccable, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his dark eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone accustomed to seeing through lies and cutting to the truth. "Bella," he had called out, his voice carrying the warmth of a father's love mixed with the authority of a man accustomed to being heard. "What are you doing on the ground?" "Mija." The sight of her father had broken something loose in Bella's chest, and the tears that had been held back by shock and fear suddenly flowed freely. "Daddy," she had sobbed, running toward him despite the pain in her hip. "She hurt me. She pushed me down and chained up the swings." David's transformation had been immediate and dramatic. The warm father had hardened into something far more dangerous, a civil rights attorney who had spent the last 15 years taking on cases of discrimination, harassment, and abuse of power. His eyes had swept the park, taking in the scene with the practiced efficiency of someone trained to gather evidence and build cases. "Who hurt you?" he had asked, his voice remaining calm despite the fury building behind his eyes. "That lady." Bella had pointed toward Karen, who was still standing near the swing set, her phone in her hand, her face suddenly pale as she realized the implications of what she was witnessing. David had followed his daughter's pointing finger, his gaze settling on Karen with laser-like intensity. Years of experience had taught him to read people quickly, and what he saw in Karen's defensive posture and guilty expression told him everything he needed to know. "Stay right here, Bella," he had said, his voice gentle but firm. "Don't move. Don't say anything. Just let Daddy handle this." David had walked across the park with the measured pace of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Each step had been calculated, his bearing radiating the kind of authority that came from years of facing down opposing counsel, hostile judges, and powerful adversaries. "Excuse me," he had said as he approached Karen, his voice carrying the professional courtesy that preceded legal devastation. "I believe you just assaulted my daughter." Karen's face had gone through a series of rapid transformations from guilt to defiance to fear to attempted intimidation. I don't know what she told you, but I was just enforcing community standards. That child was damaging property and refused to comply with a direct order. A direct order, David had repeated, his eyebrows rising slightly. And you are? Karen Whitfield, HOA representative and community safety coordinator. She had replied, puffing out her chest and touching her badge as if it were a shield. I have full authority to enforce rules and regulations in this community park. David had smiled then, the kind of smile that defense attorneys learn to fear in courtrooms across the country. I see. And what specific rule or regulation authorizes you to physically assault a child? I didn't assault anyone, Karen had protested, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. I was protecting community property from damage. That child was clearly exceeding the weight limit for the equipment. The weight limit, David had repeated thoughtfully, pulling out his phone with practiced ease. That's interesting. Tell me, Ms. Whitfield, are you familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act specifically? The provisions regarding equal access to public accommodations and the prohibition against discrimination based on perceived disabilities. Karen's face had gone pale as the implications of his words began to sink in. This isn't about disabilities. This is about safety and property damage. My daughter has a diagnosed anxiety disorder and uses this swing set as part of her therapeutic treatment plan. David had continued, his voice remaining calm and professional. Her pediatric therapist specifically recommended the swinging motion for sensory regulation and anxiety management. Are you telling me that you physically removed her from medical equipment and then chained it shut to prevent her from accessing her prescribed therapy? The legal trap had been sprung with surgical precision. In less than 2 minutes, David had transformed Karen's narrative from protecting community property to denying medical treatment to a disabled child. The shift had been so sudden and complete that Karen had actually stepped backward, as if the words themselves had physical force. I didn't know, Karen had stammered, her carefully constructed authority crumbling like sand. She didn't tell me she had a medical condition. She didn't tell you, David had repeated, his voice rising slightly for the first time. Ms. Whitfield, she's 9 years old. Are you seriously suggesting that a 9-year-old child should have to disclose her medical history to you in order to access a public playground? Karen had opened her mouth to respond, but no words had come out. The absurdity of her position was becoming clear, even to her, and the legal quicksand was getting deeper with every passing moment. Furthermore, David had continued, his phone now recording the conversation. You chained the equipment shut. Tell me, Ms. Whitfield, under what authority did you vandalize public property? Because that's what this is: vandalism. Destruction of public property. Denial of equal access. And let's not forget the physical assault on a minor child. The word assault had hung in the air like a death sentence. Karen had looked around desperately, as if hoping for some intervention, some escape from the legal nightmare that was rapidly engulfing her. It wasn't assault, she had protested weakly. I just helped her off the swing. You helped her off the swing by grabbing her wrist and yanking her to the ground, David had asked, his voice filled with incredulous disbelief. Ms. Whitfield, I need you to understand something very clearly. I am David Martinez. I am a civil rights attorney. I have spent the last 15 years of my career fighting exactly this kind of discrimination and abuse of power. And what you just did to my daughter, this is going to be the mistake that defines the rest of your life. The introduction had landed like a thunderbolt. Karen's face had gone from pale to ashen, her hands beginning to shake as the full magnitude of her situation became clear. She wasn't dealing with the parent of just any child. She had assaulted the daughter of one of the most prominent civil rights attorneys in the state. "I want you to look at my daughter," David had continued, his voice rising with controlled fury. "Look at her. She's sitting in the dirt, crying, because you decided that your petty power trip was more important than her dignity, her safety, and her civil rights. You took a child who was engaging in medically necessary therapy and turned her into a victim of discrimination and assault." Karen had glanced toward Bella, who was indeed still sitting where her father had left her, tears streaming down her face, dirt streaking her clothes. The visual evidence of what had occurred was undeniable and damning. "I'm sorry," Karen had whispered, the words barely audible. "I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean what?" David had cut her off sharply. "You didn't mean to grab my daughter. You didn't mean to throw her to the ground. You didn't mean to chain up the equipment. You didn't mean to call her fat and tell her she was damaging property. Which part of this calculated campaign of harassment and abuse was accidental?" "Ms. Whitfield." Each question had been delivered like a body blow, systematically destroying any possible defense or excuse. David's courtroom experience was on full display, his ability to dismantle an opponent's position with precision and efficiency. "Please," Karen had begged, her voice breaking with desperation. "I made a mistake. Can't we work this out?" David had looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Work this out, Ms. Whitfield. You assaulted a disabled child. You denied her access to medical equipment. You engaged in disability discrimination. You vandalized public property. You committed battery against a minor. And you did all of this while acting under the color of authority as an HOA representative." The legal charges had been laid out with devastating clarity, each one a potential felony or serious misdemeanor. Karen had visibly wilted under the weight of the accusations, her carefully constructed persona of authority and righteousness crumbling completely. "I'm going to tell you what's going to happen now," David had continued, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's sentence. "I'm going to take my daughter to the hospital to document her injuries. I'm going to file a police report for assault and battery. I'm going to file a federal civil rights complaint. I'm going to sue you personally for damages. I'm going to sue the HOA for allowing this to happen. And I'm going to make sure that every news outlet in the state knows exactly what you did here today." Karen had actually staggered backward at the comprehensive nature of the legal assault being planned. This wasn't just about a civil lawsuit. This was about criminal charges, federal investigations, and public humiliation on a massive scale. "But first," David had said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his previous shouting, "you're going to unlock those chains and restore my daughter's access to this equipment. Right now." Karen's hands had shaken as she fumbled with the padlock. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated. The chains had fallen to the ground with a metallic clatter that seemed to echo through the entire park. "Thank you," David had said with cold courtesy. "Now, I want you to understand something very clearly. If you ever, and I mean ever, approach my daughter again, if you speak to her, if you look at her sideways, if you so much as breathe in her direction, I will consider it harassment, and I will have you arrested. Do you understand me?" "Yes," Karen had whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I didn't hear you," David had said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Yes, I understand," Karen had repeated, louder this time, her voice cracking with emotion. "Good," David had said, stepping back and pulling out his phone. "Now, while you're standing there, I'm going to call my friend Sarah at Channel 7 News. She's always interested in stories about civil rights violations and child abuse. I think she'll find this particularly compelling." The dial tone had sounded like a death knell in the quiet park. Karen had watched in horror as David's finger moved across the screen, each digit bringing her closer to public humiliation and professional destruction. "Sarah, it's David Martinez. I have a story for you. A civil rights story involving a child with disabilities being assaulted by an HOA representative." "Yes, I said assaulted. Can you get a crew to Willowbrook Community Park in the next hour?" "Perfect. I'll be here with my daughter and all the evidence you'll need." The call had been mercifully brief, but its implications were staggering. Within the hour, news crews would arrive, and Karen's face would be broadcast across the region as the woman who assaulted a disabled child on a playground. As David had ended the call, Karen had made one final, desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her life. "Please, Mr. Martinez, I have children of my own. I can't. This will destroy me." David had looked at her with something that might have been pity, if pity could be frozen solid and sharpened to a point. "Ms. Whitfield, you have children of your own, and you chose to assault someone else's child. You knew exactly what you were doing when you grabbed my daughter. You knew exactly what you were doing when you threw her to the ground. You knew exactly what you were doing when you chained up the equipment. The only thing you didn't know was that you were messing with the wrong family." Karen had nodded mutely, her last hope of mercy extinguished by the cold logic of David's response. She had created this situation through her own choices, and now she would face the consequences of those choices. "Daddy!" Bella had called out from her position near the edge of the park, her voice small and uncertain. David had immediately shifted back into father mode, his expression softening as he looked at his daughter. "Yes. Mija. Can we go home now?" Bella had asked, her voice carrying the exhaustion of a child who had been through too much. "In just a few minutes, sweetheart," David had replied, his voice filled with tenderness. "Daddy needs to take some pictures first. And then we're going to go see Dr. Peterson to make sure you're okay." The next hour had been a whirlwind of activity. David had systematically documented everything the chain swing set: Bella's injuries, the scattered evidence of the confrontation. His phone had buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, colleagues, and other attorneys who had heard about the incident through the legal community's efficient grapevine. True to his word, Sarah Chen from Channel 7. News had arrived with a full crew within 45 minutes. The sight of the news van pulling into the parking lot had been the final nail in Karen's coffin, the moment when her private shame became public spectacle. "David." Sarah had called out as she approached, her cameraman already filming, her producer taking notes. "I got here as fast as I could. Is this the woman who assaulted your daughter?" Karen had tried to flee at that point, but David's voice had stopped her cold. "Ms. Whitfield, I wouldn't leave if I were you. The police are on their way, and running from the scene would just add another charge to the list." The interview that followed had been devastating in its simplicity. David had calmly explained what had happened, while Bella sat beside him, her torn clothes and tear-streaked face providing stark visual evidence of the abuse she had endured. "She grabbed my wrist really hard," Bella had told the camera, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "And then she pushed me down and said I was too fat for the swings. But I'm not fat, am I?" "Daddy." "No, Mija," David had replied, his arm tightening around his daughter's shoulders. "You're perfect, exactly the way you are. And no one has the right to hurt you or make you feel bad about yourself." The simple exchange had been more powerful than any legal argument, more damning than any criminal charge. Here was a father comforting his injured daughter, and there was the woman who had caused that injury, standing in the background, like a specter of cruelty and discrimination. When the police had finally arrived, Karen had been read her rights and taken into custody for assault and battery on a minor. The sight of her being led away in handcuffs had been captured by every news camera in the area, ensuring that the image would be played on every local news broadcast for days to come. But the real reckoning had come later. In the weeks and months that followed, David had been true to his word about the comprehensive legal assault, filing charges and complaints at every level of government. The federal civil rights complaint had triggered an investigation that exposed a pattern of discriminatory behavior by the HOA, leading to a complete overhaul of their policies and leadership. The personal lawsuit had been settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, but sources close to the case suggested that the settlement was substantial enough to fund Bella's therapy and education for years to come. More importantly, the settlement had included a provision for the installation of new, more inclusive playground equipment that could accommodate children of all sizes and abilities. Karen herself had faced a cascade of consequences that had effectively destroyed her life as she knew it. The criminal charges had been reduced to misdemeanors in exchange for a guilty plea, but the damage to her reputation had been irreversible. She had been removed from her position with the HOA, banned from all community events, and forced to relocate to another state to escape the constant harassment and public shaming. More significantly, the restraining order that David had obtained had been so comprehensive that Karen was prohibited from coming within 500 feet of any playground, school, or child-centered facility. The order had effectively ended her career in community management and left her struggling to find employment in any field that involved working with families or children. The HOA had faced its own reckoning, with the board of directors being completely replaced and the organization being placed under federal oversight for civil rights compliance. The legal fees and settlement costs had forced them to levy a special assessment on all community members, creating lasting resentment and division that would take years to heal. But perhaps the most significant consequence had been the change in Bella herself. The trauma of the assault had initially set back her therapy progress, but the overwhelming support she had received from the community had ultimately made her stronger. The swing set had been replaced with a new, more inclusive design, and Bella had become something of a local celebrity, with other children seeking her out for friendship and guidance. Dr. Chen had been amazed by Bella's resilience and growth. What happened to her was terrible, she had told David during one of their sessions. But the way the community rallied around her, the way you fought for her, the way she learned to advocate for herself, it's been transformative. She's developed a sense of justice and self-worth that many adults never achieve. 6 months after the incident, Bella had returned to the park for a special ceremony. The new playground equipment had been officially dedicated in her honor, with a small plaque reading, "Bella's Playground, where every child belongs." The ceremony had been attended by hundreds of community members, many of whom had never met Bella, but had been inspired by her story. David had stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of supporters, his voice carrying across the park where his daughter had once been assaulted and humiliated. "This playground represents more than just new equipment," he had said. "It represents our commitment as a community to protect our most vulnerable members, to stand up against discrimination and bullying, and to ensure that every child feels safe and welcome in public spaces." The applause had been thunderous, but nothing had compared to the moment when Bella had stepped forward to cut the ribbon. She had looked out at the crowd, her confidence restored, her voice clear and strong as she spoke. "Thank you for making this a place where kids like me can play without being afraid," she had said. "Thank you for showing me that when someone hurts you, there are people who will fight for you. And thank you for teaching me that being different isn't something to be ashamed of, it's something to be proud of." As the ribbon fell away and the crowd surged forward to explore the new playground. Bella had walked over to the swing set, the centerpiece of the new design, built to accommodate children of all sizes and abilities. She had climbed onto the swing with practiced ease, her father standing nearby, his eyes bright with pride and love. The gentle motion of the swing had been the same as always, the therapeutic rhythm that had helped her through so many anxious afternoons. But now, it carried additional meaning. It was a symbol of justice, of community, of the power of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. As Bella swung back and forth, her laughter mixing with the sounds of other children playing, David had reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The assault on his daughter had been a terrible thing, but it had also revealed the strength and character of their community. It had shown that justice was possible, that bullies could be defeated, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not in courtrooms, but in playgrounds, where children learn their first lessons about fairness, dignity, and the right to be treated with respect. The sun had been setting as the ceremony wound down, casting long shadows across the playground. But for Bella, sitting on her swing, feeling the wind in her hair and the support of her community surrounding her, the future had never looked brighter. She had learned that she was not powerless, that her voice mattered, and that there would always be people willing to fight for her right to exist in the world exactly as she was. And, in a house across town, Karen Whitfield had been packing boxes for her move to another state. Her life forever changed by the moment she decided that her prejudice was more important than a child's dignity. The consequences of that decision would follow her forever. A reminder that power without compassion is not strength, but weakness, and that the greatest victories are often won not by those who wield authority, but by those who stand up to it when it's used to hurt the innocent. The story of Bella and the swing set had become something of a legend in the community, passed down from parent to child as a reminder of the importance of standing up for what's right. And, every afternoon, as children played on the inclusive playground that bore her name, Bella's legacy continued to grow not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience, justice, and the power of a community that refuses to tolerate discrimination against its most vulnerable members. The swing set still stood in the center of the playground, its chains strong and new, ready to support any child who needed the gentle therapy of motion and the simple joy of flight. And sometimes, in the late afternoon, when the light was just right, you could still see Bella there, swinging back and forth, her laughter echoing across the park like a promise that justice, however delayed, would always find a way to prevail.